Spoiler alert! If you don't know Star Wars, there may be spoilers ahead. Proceed with caution.
Hey, as a fan of both Star Wars and compassion, today's topic seems like a no-brainer. Here are my top 5 acts of compassion in the Star Wars saga. Number 5. Going back to Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, we see Qui-Gon Jinn and his young apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, travel to Tatooine, where they find 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker, strong with the Force, but living with his mother Shmi as slaves. Qui-Gon goes on to negotiate freedom for Anakin, but this is not the act of compassion. In fact, this decision from Qui-Gon was actually quite selfish. He saw Anakin as the chosen one and was convinced that he would bring balance to the Force. Okay, so that might sound important, but in that same moment he decided not to negotiate freedom for Anakin's mother. So he took the boy and left the boy's mother in chains. I'd actually argue that this thoughtless, rather cold decision was the beginning of Anakin's turn to the dark side. No, the great act of compassion here was that of Shmi, who, for the sake of Anakin and for the sake of alleviating his suffering, as well as preventing future suffering, she let him go with the Jedi, and at great cost and sacrifice to herself. That is compassion, a powerful motive to be kind, caring and helpful to others, sometimes at great cost to oneself. Number 4. Jumping forward to Episode 4, A New Hope, and Luke has teamed up with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Han Solo and Chewbacca to save the princess. But this princess was actually badass Leia, who greets them with, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?" And then she basically goes on to do as much of the saving as anyone. But the act of compassion is when Luke, Leia and the team see across the way Obi-Wan being confronted by Darth Vader. I can still remember the sheer terror I felt seeing this big baddie when I first watched the movie in the 1970s. As you know, I hope. The confrontation ends when Obi-Wan raises his lightsaber and Vader strikes, Obi-Wan's robes and lightsaber falling empty to the ground. Luke cries out. A firefight breaks out between the heroes and a squad of stormtroopers. And eventually the voice of Obi-Wan convinces Luke to run, and the Millennium Falcon takes flight. But once they're safe in space, Luke is devastated by the loss of his new mentor. He sits stunned and distraught, and this is where the act of compassion truly occurs. Leia brings him a blanket, wraps it around Luke's shoulders, and comforts him about his loss. Now, to put this into perspective, Leia had just been through a terrible ordeal herself. She'd been captured and held captive by the Empire, probably tortured, and forced to watch the destruction of her home planet, Alderaan, and all those she loved. And yet there she was, comforting Luke. Leia is strong, courageous, and deeply compassionate. At her core, she helps those who are suffering. This is also what makes her such a great and inspiring leader of the Rebel Alliance. Number 3. This might be an unexpected one, but it struck me as a powerful display of compassion. In Season 3, Episode 20 of the animated series Star Wars Rebels, Obi-Wan Kenobi faces off with one of his great nemeses, Darth Maul, on the planet Tatooine. This is after the fall of the Republic, during the time of the Empire. Almost all Jedi have been killed during the Great Purge of Order 66, and Obi-Wan has escaped to Tatooine to watch over the growing Luke. Maul discovers him and realizes that Obi-Wan is protecting something or someone, and they face off under the starry desert skies. But quite quickly, Obi-Wan inflicts the mortal lightsaber strike. Maul falls, and Obi-Wan catches him and holds him quite tenderly as he dies. To me, this is an act of compassion, because despite their long-standing enmity, Maul had killed Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan's master, and Duchess Satine, Obi-Wan's soulmate. Obi-Wan was able to let go of anger and hatred and comfort Maul in the end. So compassion isn't only for those we like or love. And compassion doesn't mean we can't protect ourselves or those we do love. But it does mean that we try to let go of anger and hate and relieve and prevent unnecessary suffering where we can, even for our enemies. And this also applies to self-compassion, trying to comfort even those parts of ourselves that we don't like, or perhaps we hate, loathe, despise. Number 2, I'm going to put the following act of compassion as number 2 rather than number 1. My number 1 might surprise you, but number 2 is Luke believing in his father, Darth Vader, even when all around him were advising him not to, and through persistence and commitment, bringing Vader back to the light. Obi-Wan and Yoda had both encouraged Luke to kill Vader. Somehow they believed Vader was beyond saving. Goodness knows, they'd both failed Anakin many times before he fell to the dark side. But Luke didn't waver. As he said to Obi-Wan in Return of the Jedi, there is still good in him. And so he allowed himself to be captured and taken to Vader and Emperor Palpatine. But during the whole parley and fighting that occurred, Luke never wavered, even saying, "Your thoughts betray you, Father. I feel the good in you," the conflict. Vader denied it, and back and forth they went. But eventually, thanks to Luke's belief and commitment, Vader realized the error of his ways, destroyed Palpatine, and soon to succumb to his wounds, Luke said to him, "I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you." And Vader, now Anakin Skywalker once more, says, "You already have, Luke. You were right. You were right about me. Tell your sister you were right."
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have.
To be honest, this was compassion flowing in 2 directions. Vader, having come back to the light, saved Luke from Palpatine, and Luke, through his strength and conviction, saved Vader from himself. Okay, number 1. To me, the single greatest act of compassion in the whole Star Wars saga didn't happen in the original trilogy, didn't happen in the prequels, and certainly didn't happen in the sequels. It happened in a little in-between movie called Rogue One, a movie that explained so much, and a moment that was something of a linchpin for the whole series. In Rogue One, Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, and a team of willing rebels went to the planet Scarif to steal the plans for the Death Star. Jyn's father, Galen Erso, had led the design of the Death Star for the Empire, but had built a fatal flaw into the plans, hoping that this might right his wrong. The small band of rebels knew what they were up against, knew how unlikely it was they would ever return safely home. And they went anyway, driven by a motivation to prevent suffering and death in the galaxy. Through great strength and courage, dedication and sacrifice, Jyn and Cassian managed to upload the plans to the rebel fleet high above, before being killed in the Death Star's destruction of their own facility, and possibly the entire planet. I'm not sure. All the events that followed in Star Wars episodes 4 through 6 were only made possible by their efforts. So often, it's everyday people who, through these qualities of wisdom, strength, courage and commitment, carry out the greatest acts of compassion, perhaps even anonymously, without any medals or recognition, and perhaps at great cost to themselves. This is why I recommend the efforts of Jyn, Cassian and the team as the greatest act of compassion in the whole of Star Wars. I hope you enjoyed this little take on Star Wars and compassion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are there other examples of compassion in Star Wars that you would put in the top 5? Or the top 10? And I'd greatly appreciate if you'd give this video a like and perhaps subscribe to my channel. It's all about compassion and self-compassion, compassion-focused therapy and compassionate mind training, and cultivating compassion in daily life.